Well, hello there, and welcome back to Fabulous Folklore Presents. This month, I'm pleased to introduce you to Niina Niskanen, a Finnish artist, writer, and folklorist who specialises in Finnish, Baltic, and Sámi mythology. She's an online educator and hosts at Heart of Mielikki, one of the first online courses about Finnish mythology for non-Finnish speaking audiences. Niina is also an artist with a BA in illustration, and her work has been displayed in numerous art exhibitions in Finland and abroad. So, in this chat, we're going to talk about, among other things, Sámi myths, a beautiful legend about the Northern Lights, which I guarantee you'll like, and some similarities between Finnish and Sámi mythology. Enjoy. Hello and welcome to Fabulous Folklore. How are you doing?
I'm great, thank you. Happy to be here.
Brilliant. Well, it's really cool that you are to talk about Sámi mythology because it's something I've never covered before. So, who are the Sámi for anyone who is unfamiliar with them?
So, the Sami are indigenous people of Finland, Sweden, Norway, and Russia, and they reside in the northern parts of these countries. In Russia, in the area of Kola Peninsula, just in the top of Russia.
Mhm.
And in Norway, I believe there's about 50,000 Samis. Here in Finland, about 10,000. About the same amount in Sweden, and then about 2,000 in Russia.
Mhm.
And my great grandmother was a Sami woman, and she came from the group. They were called Kemin Sami. They were also known as Forest Sami, and the name Forest Sami it comes from that they built their villages near the forest, whereas some of the other Sami tribes usually resided in the mountains or near the mountains.
Mhm.
Sadly, the language, the Kemin Sami, it vanished already in the 19th century, so I sadly don't know how to speak it. Vanished or was it oppressed? Maybe we can talk about that a bit later. It's a bit controversial. But yeah, about 10 years ago, no, sorry, 5 years ago, my uncle was doing family research and he traced the family lineage of my grandmother, great grandmother, to 19th century. And then when I have been doing my own research, I was managed to trace the family lineage to 15th century. It's really cool.
That is cool.
Yes, very cool. And it's interesting because for the all the way to the 17th century, you get people with last names, and after that, it's just first names. And it's hard to say who is who, but still.
So, are
And
these stories passed on largely from person to person then, rather than them being written
yes,
down anywhere?
most Sami folk tales have been passed on orally or from one generation to another. Of course, nowadays we have lots of uh, books in Swedish and in Finnish, what have come across about Sami folk tales written by Sami themselves. So that's nice.
That's cool. Um, so I know obviously you've done research into Finnish mythology as well. So
Mm.
is there a lot of similarity between Finnish myths and Sami myths, or would you say that they're from like a common source?
There are similarities, also differences. Um, Finnish is a Finno-Ugric language, so it's not Indo-European like most languages spoken in the world. So Finno-Ugric languages are languages like Finnish, Hungarian, Estonian, and then Mari and Komi, which are spoken by some Finno-Ugric tribes in Russia. Then Sami languages, there are about 8 or 9 at the moment that are spoken, and there are Samoyedi languages. And these two language groups are part of a bigger language group, which are called Uralic languages. And those languages originate from the Ural Mountains from Siberia. So it goes back to thousands and thousands of years. And What I have studied Finnish mythology and then Sami mythology, I'd say that the oldest layers in all the myths are somewhere from that Siberian Proto-Uralic language area, which is really interesting. So they usually have certain patterns that are very similar in all of these myths. And it's usually animism, shamanism, certain stories about the way the world was created. Certain concepts are very similar. And worldview, the idea of a world tree, which is something that we can find from lots of different cultures. So it's really interesting.
Hmm. I thought it was really interesting when I was reading the book, actually, and you mentioned that the Sami world tree is an alder. When obviously
Yes,
when you sort of look at the Norse ones and it's an ash, and I'm like, oh, alder trees are so cool.
yes, that is true. And they had some kind of very strong spiritual link with the alder because the bark of the alder is red and they extract this red liquid from the alder and they used that to paint the shaman drums, which I thought was really, really cool. And they dipped their arrows with it. And I don't know if they did paintings, but that would have been really cool as well. But definitely it was sort of linked with hunting, birth, and death. And I noticed that they do use red quite a bit in Sami outfits, at
Mm.
least as decorations. So I think they do have some kind of significant connection with the older tree.
Yeah, cool.
Yes,
Obviously you've mentioned shamanism a couple of times, and I know obviously they appear in quite a lot of the legends, and you talk about it in the book. Obviously that's one of those terms that you see thrown around quite a lot in certain aspects of
yes.
Instagram in particular. Um, and in the new age space, like being a shaman or shaman is
Mm.
quite a popular thing to claim. Um, how does shamanism work for the Sami then?
I think it works in the way they were spiritually constructed. Like in pre-Christian times, the shaman was the spiritual leader of the tribe or the medicine man, however you like to call it. And because the society was so heavily linked with this idea that everything around you is alive, everything has a spirit. So when you work with the idea that you hunt, you fish, you herd reindeers, you need to work with those spirits that provide these animals, that nurture these animals. So it's very interesting connection with the reindeer gods because one of the concepts in Sami folk tales is the idea of Seita, which is like a stone formation. But they were often like connected to these different methods of hunting or fishing or reindeer. So there was a Seita for reindeers. You would make sacrifices for the Seita, and then the reindeer god would provide reindeers for you. So it was like this give and take relationship with those spirits of the land and the deities.
Mhm. So could you tell us about some of the protective spirits in Sami stories? Because I noticed that you mentioned that obviously there's lots in nature, but that people have them as well. So how do they work?
Yeah, some of my favorite protector spirits were these three sister goddesses. They were called Yuksakka, Uksakka, and Sarakka. The pronunciation varies a little bit depending like the Sami language. I think these are like from northern Sami, the words. I can be wrong there. But Sarakka was the goddess of giving birth. She was the protector of girls and children, and women would sacrifice, food for her when the birth was successful. And then Yuksakka, she was the goddess of the bow. She was the bow woman, the hunter. very similar to Artemis or Skadi, if you want to make like connections to other goddesses. And Uksakka is really interesting. She was the protector of doors and gateways. So it's quite funny to think about when the child grows in the safety of the home. When they leave home, they are no longer under the guardianship of Uksakka, because then you start your own life, your own family, your own adventure. But these three goddesses, they would protect the child when the child was growing. And Yuksakka, she was the protector of boys and men, and Sarakka was the protector of girls and women, and then they would protect them throughout their lives, which I thought was really interesting because you don't really hear that in other cultures that much, that there are these type of gods and goddesses. And these three goddesses, they are portrayed, they're usually painted in the bottom of the shaman drum because they were believed to live underneath kota, the tent where the Samis traditionally used to live. It's really interesting.
Mm.
Yes.
So are they some of the most common ones that people would be sort of, I guess, paying devotion to?
Yes, they're very common in the shaman drums. Like the most common shaman drum pattern is this sort of so-called heliocentric drum where there is the sun in the middle and then there are all these type of motifs around the sun. Then in the bottom there's the three goddesses. So it's a very common motif in the Sami shaman drums. It's really lovely actually when you think about it, that you always have these three, goddesses protecting you since the moment you are born.
Hmm.
Very beautiful.
Yeah. The other one that caught my eye when I was looking through them is the god of community, because I was thinking, I can't really think of many gods of community from other, particularly the sort of the Western cultures anyway. So could you tell us about the god of community? Because he fascinates me.
So then there was also a god Aradian, but I don't know if I'm pronouncing this correctly myself. Um, I hope so. So he was the god of community, and Aradian was like, I haven't really found a similar god from other cultures, but he was the god of protector of morality, really in the community. So like in these, communities, there's always going to be some kind of troublemaker or some kind of illegalities might happen. So if people could not punish someone as a community, then it would be Radian who would, do that. And it's interesting because, um, how organized were these communities back in the days? We don't know. We don't know how they punished troublemakers or anything like that. And some years ago, I actually read a book about Inuits, and I wonder if this is something like common thing among like indigenous Arctic people, but they had these very, strong rules about taboos. The Inuits, that there were taboos related to certain things, and I found something very similar with Tradien. So people were sort of afraid to, do certain things because they were afraid that, okay, this god might actually harm them if they would, do something, bad or illegal. So, and I thought that was really interesting. And in the stories, he usually has like a whole family with him. He has a wife and children. So maybe it's almost like a reflection of the human society. But I found that quite common among lots of folk tales,
Mm.
that the word of the gods is somehow reflected in the human world or otherwise vice versa.
Mm. So who would you say are some of the most common gods that we haven't already talked about? Because I noticed there was a thunder god in there, and we do love a good thunder god.
Yes, yes. The name of the thunder god was Horagallis. That was one of his names. And he was the god of the weather, and very, very similar to sort of other European thunder gods, I'd say. Very similar to Thor, or here in Finland we have Ukko, who is the thunder god. And I think he even had an axe or something. But I did also read once that the thunder god of the Sami, might be based on like a proto-Uric thunder god. I think his name was Ilmaris or something. But yes, the thunder god for the Sami was also god of the reindeers, I think. And people would sacrifice reindeers for him, honor him. Another god that I really like, she's a goddess, and she's the goddess for the Sami. Her name was Veive, and she was the goddess of the sun. So traditionally, the Samis, they did worship the sun as a deity. And it's really interesting when I read about the Sami gods and goddesses, they didn't really always see them as in human forms. Like traditionally, it's common in Europe or lots of countries. It was more of an animistic idea that spirits were invisible and more abstract. So the sun is sometimes portrayed as the sun, like the way it is in the sky, or as a pretty Sami woman. But this is really interesting because some years ago I read a book from a Finnish folklorist. Her name was Anna-Lena Siikala. She passed away a few years ago. And it just got me thinking because, in Lapland, they worship Päivä as the sun goddess. Then in Norse mythology, sun goddess was Sunna. And then in Latvia and Lithuania, the sun goddess was Sole. And in Finland, we've had a sun goddess whose name was Päivätär. And this folklorist, Anna-Lena Siikala, she suggested that she believed that in Finland there was a cult of Päivätär at some point, that people did worship her as a very important deity. And I wondered, okay, this sounds like this being very common in Northern Europe together, just like the same goddess, just with different names. That was really fascinating. But Päivä was a really important goddess for the Sami because summer was time of plenty and winter was very hard time, very cold times. And Päivä was celebrated during summer solstice, and people made these. I think they're called sun wheels. They made them from willow branches, and they hugged them to the trees. And during winter, they sacrificed white reindeers for her and white animals. I think they were white because it sort of symbolized the sun itself. She was a very important goddess for the Sami.
Mm-hmm. Did they also honor her sort of at the winter solstice, where obviously it's difficult to tell, I guess, the further north you are
Yes.
when the sun's actually starting to come back, but would they have honored her then as well?
Yes, they did honor this sun goddess. I think there was a custom that in February, when the sun would come up, people would go outside to greet the sun. They make solutions for the sun. It's really nice. And that was also interesting that it was believed that during the winter time, the sun was sick, the sun was asleep, or they couldn't see the sun, so they were worried about it, and then they would pray the sun would come back. And I think they also left food sacrifices for the sun, so that the sun would become healthy, would gain its power, and then would shine again. And I think I also read that something similar happened in Egypt long time ago, and people would do the same with the sun god, and they believed that the sun was in bad health or ill, and then during the winter they tried to give gifts for the sun, so the sun would come back. So it's interesting how the same narrative appears just in the other side of the world.
Mm.
Mm,
I quite like it in a way because it shows that humans have quite similar preoccupations, sort of despite where they are.
mm,
Mm.
yes. And sun is something that every culture is very dependable.
Yeah.
Same with the thunder god.
Yeah, that's the thing that fascinates me. Of all the things that you could choose to have a god of, thunder seems really popular. And it's where I am, it's not hugely common to have thunder. So I'm like, why are they so important?
Yes. Like here in Finland, definitely in the summer we get thunder, but that's only like a couple months really. I think it might be the noise that the ancient people were fascinated by, maybe, or the
Mm.
lightnings.
I think the other thing that caught my eyes are talking about the sky, and obviously we've had a lot recently in the UK about people being able to actually see the Northern Lights with the naked eye, which has been really cool. And I think the Sami myths around and the Finnish myths as well around the Northern Lights are some of the nicest ones. So what are some of the myths associated with the Northern Lights?
Oh, I love this topic. I think it's because where I'm from, we can see northern lights pretty frequently. They're usually green around here, and I've heard that it has something to do with the sea or a proximity of the sea. I don't know the science behind it, but one of the stories is about the firefox. So in Finnish, northern lights are known as revontulet. That's the official word for it. It comes from the old Finnish word repo, which means a fox. So it's fox's fires. And I'm not really sure if this is a Sami story or if this is a Finnish story. I've heard it for the first time from my grandmother a long time ago. And so the story goes that northern lights are created by a giant fox who runs in the snowy hills, and the hunters try to catch it. And it's like a phoenix bird of all the foxes. It's magical. And when you catch it, you will be rich forever, and you get money and fortune and fame and all that. But of course, nobody can ever catch it because it's a magical fox. But when the fox runs in the snowy hills, it first sparkles and it creates northern lights. And there's some science behind this because when the air is very cold, fur and hair can sparkle little bit and create electric sparkles. So it's a really nice story. And in Lapland, one of the superstitions related with northern lights is that if you whistle, the northern lights come down from the sky and then they start to chase you. And, it has never happened when I have whistled to the northern lights.
I love that.
Yes. But one of the older beliefs that I have found is that the ancestors live in the northern lights, which I think is a very nice story.
Yeah, that's nice that. Why I must ask though, why would the Northern Lights chase you? Like why would that be a good thing? Would it like that's such a cool idea that like whistling gets their attention, but then what do they do if they catch you?
Mm, hard to say. Maybe they take you with them. I don't know. I
Oh,
suppose it has been something to do with like playing your strengths. When you whistle to the northern lights, you try to show that you are more powerful than the northern lights. Something like that. You should try that next time when you see the northern lights.
I can't whistle very well, but I'll give it a go. Oh, that is cool though. Obviously they're really lovely stories, and I do like the Firefox.
Mm.
But how about sort of scary or fearsome figures? What kind of figures like that show up in the Sami stories?
There are quite a few. One of the more famous ones is this giant called Stallo, doing the Swedish pronunciation there. So he's a sort of a winter giant, in some stories he's more like a vampire or zombie spirit, which is quite interesting. But I think he originally presented this kind of dark, evil that lies in the nighttime, or these, fearsome beings that exist in the darkness. And it's also a bit like an umbrella term for all these scary evil beings that there might exist. And of course, during these, older times, people were afraid of the darkness because you wouldn't know what was lurking there. And I once read that Stalo represents sort of dark shadows behind mountains, which is quite, scary. Then there are also humorous stories that it actually was a representation of a tax bearer or a hunter or something like that, more of a goofy, silly giant character. But some of the more scarier stories were that Stella would come uh, at house during the night and would suck the brains of the children, and then people would have to put like buckets of water near the bed so that the Stella would not suck the brains, but drink the water. So yeah, very much of a vampire character, really. And then there are also sort of stories about evil shamans who wanted the powers of others or hurt others. Then they would do almost a bit like a voodoo ritual. Then they would raise a stallo, and the stallo would be a bit like of a zombie figure, and then they would take revenge on this person who the evil witch or shaman wanted to hurt. So those are interesting stories about Stallo as well. Very mysterious character, but the more time goes on, it becomes more of a character that people use to scare children. You know, behave good. Yes.
Mhm. So, are there many stories about? Because I'm guessing with that part of the world, you've obviously got the likes of bears and wolves and things. So do they
Yes.
show up instead of monsters? Because I'd imagine a bear would be quite scary if you suddenly encounter.
Mm. It's interesting when in most part of Europe there are werewolf stories. In Finland and in Lapland, there are lots of stories about people becoming bears and so being bears. So it's quite a unique character. Yes, bears were very important animals, also for the Sami. Not as maybe not as important as reindeers, but definitely important. They were sort of feared animals and also respected at the same time. And it's interesting in Finnish folk tales when we sort of read, so look at the timeline of the way people have reacted to the bears. First, bear was revered as a god, king of the forest, very much of a respected animal. Then, when Christianity comes to Finland, bear gets downgraded. It becomes more of a nuisance, and people start to make mockery of it. So it's no longer a god. It's more of a devil or an imp, something to get rid of. So it sort of goes up and down, the respect that people have for the bear. It's a little sad, actually.
Mm.
But it's interesting because in Finnish, I think we have like 2,000 words for the bear or nicknames, many of them, because back in the days, bear was one of the gods, same way as the reindeer was a god for the Sami. It was very much a respected animal. And this is also something that can be found from sort of this proto-Uralic worldview that bear was revered as a god in many of these sort of Siberian cultures or Finno-Ugric cultures. It's
Mm.
really fascinating.
So, what exactly was the impact of Christianity on the belief systems in these areas? I'm going to assume it wasn't a good one.
You can say that. Well, what I have read, when people first started to collect the stories of the Sami, first people who did that were like clergymen and priests. And of course, because of that, a lot of these early myths that were written down, they were written down with Christian lens, and it's hard to interpret them like what they were originally. So it took a lot of time, hundreds of years, before we would get sort of non-Christian versions of the Sami myths. So it might have created some confusion for those who have tried to interpret the myths. Like one of the examples is the idea of the underworld in the Sami folk tales, because I do believe that originally Samis didn't really have that kind of underworld where we think about like Christian hell or things like that. I think they believed the reincarnation and that the person would come back again as a human or as an animal or something else. So that's quite a big shift in terms of the mythology, because suddenly you don't have the reincarnation aspect, but it becomes the idea of a Christian hell. So another thing about the sort of relic shamanistic aspect in the Sami mythology is the idea of three-layered world. It's really interesting, and I have found this from all the Finno-Ugric mythologies, and also lots of like Siberian, different Siberian tribes, different Samoyedi cultures. So it's this idea that the world has three layers, and these three layers are connected together by the world tree that we just discussed a bit already. And it's really interesting because in this three-layered world, the middle world is the land of the humans, the world of humans and the animals and certain elemental spirits. Then there's the underworld, which is the world of the dead, world of passed away ancestors. Then there's the upper world, which is the world of the gods. That's where the highest gods live. And it's really interesting because the world tree was the thing that connected these different layers. And I read once that for the shaman drum was like a sleigh or a horse that they used to travel between these three worlds. It's quite an interesting idea. So in my interpretation, the middle world, the world of humans, is our day consciousness. And then the underworld is the subconsciousness. And when the shaman goes to trance, what they do, they travel to the subconsciousness. But there are some interesting images about this in the Sami mythology, because a lot of the animals could travel between these different worlds. Birds could travel between the day consciousness and the subconsciousness. The horses could travel between the different worlds. Reindeer could travel between the different worlds. It's interesting and shows that, the animals were not just something for people to consume, but something to, live side by side. Do like that in these stories.
Hmm. I think that's something that always comes out when you look at stories from animistic sort of societies, that there's this real understanding of the fact that humans aren't at the top of a pile, like
Yes.
living alongside all of these different creatures, plants, trees, whatever they happen to be. So what do you think we could learn from that sort of mindset, approach, way of being, compared to the way that well, I say we, a lot of people in the West sort of live now?
Well, I think we could learn a lot. it wasn't that long ago I read that most young Finnish people are concerned is climate change. So definitely, maybe we should start to prioritize, what are things that are really important. Is it the profit, or is it material things, or is it nature, or, what are we going to do with our future, our environment? Sadly, with most capitalistic societies, the value that they put on environment is very little, or if anything. And it wasn't that long ago I read about the sort of how, certain millionaires or billionaires in the world could actually stop climate change with just few actions. But it's very hard, because those people who struggle with it the most are not the ones who can really do things about it.
Yeah, I remember seeing a meme where someone was like, I wish one of these billionaires would like solve climate change just for the
Yes,
bragging rights that they were the one who solved it.
true.
And I'm like, oh, come on, one of you has to be that person. But yeah, I think this is the thing when, you do see this kind of nature's there as a resource to be plundered, and
Mm,
no, that's not how it works. It's infuriating, um,
yes.
to put it mildly. I think the other thing I wanted to quickly touch on, is you mentioned briefly earlier about the way that part of the Sami language has been lost, and so on. And I think obviously there is a political dimension to
Mm.
the Sami. So why is it, do you think, that some people overlook the fact that the Sami are an indigenous population, and they maybe don't get the same attention that other indigenous populations around the world get?
Well, I can only speak from, Finnish standpoint, what I have followed. I think here in Finland, maybe it's only been the last 10 years that people have started to pay attention for cultural awareness and, cultural appropriation and things like that. So I think things are slowly changing on that department. But sadly, with lots of cases when we talk about indigenous people, that those who are in the government and, higher in the uh, higher positions, they are usually the least interested in those things. So these are, I think, something that should start from the top, but that usually is not the case the way things work out. So I hope there is going to be a bit more of a change in the future. Like I said, my great grandmother's family was Kemin Sami, and the language vanished already in the 19th century. That's also because people were oppressed to speak Finnish or Swedish back in the days, and basically children you know, um, were not allowed to speak their their own language in schools and so on. It's horrible when you think about it. But then again, in Canada, you know, native kids were not allowed to speak their languages. So this is like, a very nasty pattern that we can see in the 19th century.
Mm.
But now in Finland, there has been a lots of um, um, things going on with a lot of the Sami languages, that they are trying to revive them. Like, for example, in Sami, it's one of the Sami languages. It has about 200 or 300 speakers, and they are trying to start new schools for them and, get people interested to study the language. And I just read about this recently, that they're also trying to revive the Kemin Sami, which is the language that my ancestors spoke. It's really cool.
Mm.
And they are trying to reconstruct the language and see what it sounded like and what it was like to speak it. So I'm like, I have some hope now for the future that things are going to get better. I would really like to, learn this language and hear what it sounded like.
Mm.
Really
Yeah.
cool.
That's the thing I think with language, because it's such an interesting concept that it's almost like even when you sometimes read something and you're like, I don't know how to pronounce that because I've never heard
Mm,
it said out loud, and it's sort of I feel like you have to hear it in order to really get to grips
yes,
with it. Mm.
that's true. And even with Finnish, it's such a unique language. I always love it, when people say, "Oh, you have such a nice Finnish accent." But it is a very unique language. It has like 5 million speakers. It's not a lot. And like I've been speaking about the Uralic languages, those are very unique languages, quite rare. So
Mm.
yes, I hope that we can revive some of the Sami languages and learn about them. And it's really interesting because, like, for example, the Thunder God, it has like 5 completely different sounding names in different Sami languages. It's interesting how much variation there is.
Mm. Do you think that people taking an interest in things like the Sami legends and myths and things, would that help, do you think, for people to realize that the Sami still exist and to try and help sort of raise awareness, do you think?
Yes, that's one of the reasons why I wrote the book. I wanted to bring some more awareness because I think the stories are just wonderful. They're very magical, and I do like that there are certain things that we can learn from these stories, that we can start to pay more attention to certain things. They're just lovely.
Hmm. So obviously you mentioned the book, and I will post links and things below, but what are you working on right now then?
I am currently writing a book about Baltic folk tales, and it's like a comparison between Finnish and some of the Baltic myths. And I'm very fascinated by Estonian and Latvian myths. And it does have some similarities between Finnish mythology, and I think the further we go down in history, like the 19th century, a lot of the holidays that we used to celebrate in Finland were very similar to the ones in the Baltic countries. But I actually think the reason why many of them are gone now is because of industrialism, because those were all related to agriculture, and that one always has certain similar themes with other cultures. That's something that I'm working currently. It's a really interesting topic.
Cool, cool. You can come back on and talk about Baltic myths next
Yes,
time then.
absolutely.
So how can people find you online?
My Instagram handle is Fairy Chamber Art.
Cool. Again, I'll put links below just to make things easier
Yes.
for people to click on, because we know what people are like, um,
Mm,
with links and stuff. I always point downwards in the videos as well, like because it's going to be on YouTube, so I
yes.
tell people like where things are. And it's like everyone knows where things are on YouTube. But anyway, it's been lovely chatting to you though. That was really interesting.
Yes. It's really nice topic. Glad to be here.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
Well, thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did, feel free to leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts because that helps other people find the show too. It also takes between 4 and 6 hours to research, write, record, and edit these episodes, so if you want to help support my time in doing that, then you can buy me a coffee. Or you can join the fabulous Folklore family on Patreon and enjoy extra benefits, including exclusive episodes and articles, and even illustrated talks. All the links you need are below, and thanks in advance.